Have you ever shared a bed with someone who felt 1,000 miles away? Have you ever looked across the dinner table and seen her eyes fixed on you, but felt no warmth in them? Have you ever kissed her goodnight, out of habit, and wondered when the tenderness disappeared? She used to text you first. She used to reach for your hand in the car. She used to wait up just to talk. And now, she still does some of those things. But they feel different, don't they? Colder, more mechanical. Like a ritual no longer tied to. Meaning, you ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Did she meet someone else? Did I change? But what if the truth is more painful than that? What if she didn't fall out of love with you, but fell out of feeling? What if she got tired of trying to connect to someone who's been emotionally gone for years? You see, no one teaches men like us, men over 50 who were raised to be strong, silent, dependable, how to be felt. We know how to protect, how to provide, but not always how to be present. And so, little by little, she began to disappear, not from the house, not from your life, but from the intimate space between souls. I've been there, and when I hit that wall, that cold silence where love used to be, I didn't find the answers in logic. I found them in the psyche, in the work of Carl Jung, in the realization that what was being lost wasn't just her connection to me, it was my connection to a deeper part of myself. Carl Jung once said, "What is not brought to consciousness appears in our lives as fate." In this video, I want to walk with you, not as a guru, not as a therapist, but as a man who's been there. We'll look at what truly drives women away, through the lens of emotion, silence, and the anima we've ignored for too long. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see that she didn't leave because she stopped loving you. Maybe she left because you stopped showing her your soul. His name was Jack, a man whose story, I think, is quietly shared by thousands, though few would ever confess it out loud. Jack was 58, retired military, now working as a contractor, sharp dresser, kept his yard trimmed, paid his taxes early, and every Sunday he filled up his wife's gas tank without her asking. He did what we're told to do: show up, be steady, provide. We met one winter afternoon over coffee at a diner off Route 7 in Virginia. It was one of those quiet American places, the kind where the waitress knows your order and the music hasn't changed since 1985. He stirred his coffee for a long time before speaking. Then he said something that's echoed in me since. I don't get it. I never cheated. Never raised my voice. I did everything right, but one day she just looked at me like I wasn't there. He paused, looked out the window. I was still there, you know, same guy. Still kissed her goodnight, still worked hard. But something in her eyes, it was gone. I remember nodding, not because I had the answer, but because I knew the ache of being physically present, but emotionally invisible. I paused and looked at Jack. Not as a counselor, not as a writer, but as a man who had lived that same silence. Because I had, maybe you have too. The kind of silence where nothing is said but everything is felt, where she no longer asks how your day was, where she still sits beside you, but feels like a stranger in the same room, where the love is. Still technically there, but no longer alive. She didn't pack her bags. She didn't raise her voice. She just stopped reaching for you. And maybe you didn't even notice when it happened, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened like frost creeping over a window, quiet, gradual, and unstoppable. That's the thing no one prepares us for, the day she stops trying. Long before she ever walks out the door. And if you've ever felt that ache, the ache of being next to someone who's already gone, then maybe you know what I mean. What Jack didn't realize, what I had to learn the hard way myself, is that women don't leave because you failed at being useful. They drift away when they stop feeling emotionally connected, and that disconnection isn't loud. It doesn't slam doors or scream accusations. It withdraws. Silently, like the tide pulling, Away from your feet while you're still staring at the horizon. Carl Jung spoke often about how the most dangerous threat to love is unconsciousness, the inability to see the soul of another because we've never learned to see our own. Jack wasn't cruel. He was absent, emotionally, not in body but in spirit. He didn't know how to reach into her inner world because no one ever taught him to reach into his own. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about blame, this was about blindness. And once you understand that, everything starts to change. There's something cruel about how quiet the unraveling is. You don't notice it right away. It sneaks in between the routines, between the polite good mornings and the clinking of forks at dinner. But eventually, it becomes impossible to ignore, that sense that something once vibrant has gone still. After talking with Jack, I started to reflect on the deeper patterns, the invisible killers, the things we, as men, often carry without knowing, and how those things build emotional walls higher than any argument ever could. The first is predictability without presence. We think being dependable is enough. And in many ways, it is. We show up, we fix things, we remember birthdays. But reliability without emotional engagement feels like standing in a room full of furniture, everything in its place. Yet the space feels empty. She notices when you're there, but no longer really with her. She feels safe, yes, but not seen, and safety without intimacy becomes a quiet prison. Then there's the habit of emotional deflection. I used to do it all the time. She'd say she was tired or overwhelmed, and I'd go straight into solution mode. Why don't you take a nap? Let's just go out to eat instead. But underneath her words wasn't a request for solutions. It was a cry to be understood. And by skipping over her feelings, I told her, without saying it, that her emotions were too much, that they didn't belong. So she stopped bringing them, and perhaps the most silent killer of all, living from the head, not the heart. It's what Jung warned us about, that the man who refuses to feel, who exiles his own anima, the inner feminine, the emotional and intuitive self, becomes brittle, dry, all logic, no warmth. He becomes a fortress of answers with no windows to the soul. And here's the tragic irony. We think that's strength. We think holding it all together, never breaking, never crying, makes us safe to love. But what it often makes us is unreachable. If she can't feel you, she won't stay near you. That's not weakness. That's the cost of emotional exile. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Maybe you're starting to see it too. Maybe you're realizing that the silence in your relationship wasn't random. It was built day by day from these small, unseen habits. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like you were doing everything right, but still losing her? Not because of betrayal, not because of failure, but because she could no longer feel you. If that hits home, I invite you to take a breath. You're not broken, but maybe, just maybe, you've been living from your head for too long. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own marriage? Your words might help another man realize he's not alone. But once it happens, everything shifts. For me, it came in the middle of an argument that wasn't really an argument. She was sitting across from me, eyes tired, voice low. She wasn't accusing, she wasn't angry. She just said, "I feel alone when I'm with you." Those words didn't explode. They sank deep, like a stone into water. I had done everything I thought a good man should do. I had worked, provided, stayed faithful, kept things together. But I had missed something essential, something so human, it almost felt too fragile to name. I had stopped letting her see me, not the man who gets the oil changed or remembers to take out the trash, not the man who brings home groceries and fixes the fence. The man who feels, the man who doubts, the man who wonders if he's still wanted. That part of me, the vulnerable emotional core, I had hidden even from myself, buried it under years of being strong, quiet, dependable, thinking that was what love needed, what marriage demanded. But Jung's voice kept echoing through me. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And suddenly I understood. She hadn't fallen out of love with me. She had fallen out of connection with the version of me I had let her see. That night, I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't apologize with flowers or promises. I simply looked her in the eyes and said, I don't know when I stop showing you who I am, but I want to find him again, and I want you to see him. She didn't cry. She didn't say much, but she reached for my hand, and in that quiet I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Presence. Have you ever had a moment like that? Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet return to something real. If you've ever looked at her and felt like maybe, just maybe, you were finally there again, tell me about it, or tell me what you're still searching for. Someone out there might need to hear your story. It took me years to understand what I was really missing, not just in my marriage, but in myself. Carl Jung spoke of something called the Anima. It's the part of a man that holds his emotional truth, his creativity, his empathy, his ability to feel deeply and connect beyond words. Most of us were never taught to honor it. In fact, we were taught to silence it. As boys, we were told, don't cry. As teens, don't talk about your feelings, and as men, just be strong. So we learned to armor up. We built lives around usefulness and logic. We succeeded in being providers. We failed at being present. And that inner part, the anima, withered. In the dark, she didn't die, she just grew quiet. And when she did, so did our ability to feel fully alive. Jung believed that every man's journey is to reclaim the parts of himself he abandoned in order to survive. That's what individuation is. Becoming whole. Not perfect, not bulletproof, but real, integrated, awake, and here's the paradox that changed me. The more I ignored my emotional world, the harder I became to love. Not because I was unworthy, but because I was unreachable. My wife didn't want me to be a hero. She wanted me to be here. She wanted the man who wasn't afraid to feel lost. The man who could say, I'm tired, without shame. The man who could cry, not because he was weak, but because he was still alive inside. That's the man I'm still becoming, not through grand declarations, but through simple moments of honesty, through choosing presence over pride, through letting go of the performance and letting her see the person. And slowly, she started looking at me differently again. Not because I changed who I was, but because I returned to who I had always been, before the world told me to hide him. So, where does this leave us? If you're anything like me, maybe you're sitting in the quiet after this, feeling a little raw, a little exposed, like you've just looked into a mirror you hadn't dared face in years. But I want you to hear this. There is no shame in waking up late to your own soul. Carl Jung believed that we spend the first half of our lives building the mask, what he called the persona, the part of us that wins approval, builds careers, keeps it together. But in the second half of life, if we're brave enough, we begin the journey inward. We start asking, who am I underneath all that? And that's where the real work begins, not to become someone new, but to remember the man you were before the world told you to be anything else. If you've lost her, or if you're on the verge, know this. It's not too late to return. Not to who you used to be, but to who you truly are. And from that place of honesty, of wholeness, you may find that love can grow again. Maybe not with her. Maybe not the way it was, but with yourself. So I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever felt like you were loved for the mask you wore, but not the man underneath? If that resonates, drop a comment below. I'm ready to take the mask off. And if this message spoke to something real in you, share it with another man who might need it. Because the truth is, healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with honesty, and maybe, just maybe, that's where you begin.